Quietly, Miriam moved through the small wooden house, her fingers brushing the edges of the furniture as if she feared leaving a mark. She was 23, gentle, intelligent, painfully aware of the way the world measured her by numbers on a scale and by the fit of her clothes. Heavy set. She had learned early that people rarely looked at her eyes first. They scanned her body, they whispered, or they looked away. Her brother Thomas had managed the household since their parents passed. He was practical, rough around the edges, and not a man who spoke of feelings. Yet Miriam could sense the weight of his worry. Money was always tight. Every coin spent carried a question: would it be enough to survive another month? The village streets gave no relief. Children giggled and pointed. Women whispered behind baskets of bread. Their eyes flicked with pity or with judgment. Men avoided her gaze, polite in voice, but distant in heart. Each moment left a mark, invisible but heavy. Some mornings, Miriam stood at the window. She traced the thin trails of smoke rising from distant chimneys. And she imagined a life where her body wasn't a barrier, a life where people noticed her laughter, her mind, her kindness. But those mornings were brief. The weight of reality always pressed back: small tasks, unpaid bills, the constant hum of judgment. Thomas tried to cheer her in his own way. "Miriam, come help me with the market list," he would say, hiding worry beneath a grunt. She always heard what he didn't say: fear of failure, fear of not making it. And inside herself, she carried a quieter fear, the fear of being unseen, the fear of a life defined by what others thought she lacked. So she learned to move in shadows, to speak softly, to take the small kindnesses offered and let the rest pass by. Yet in the stillness of the house, her longing rose up. She wanted a life fully lived, a life not measured in pounds or in whispered judgments. Her reflection in the window stared back, a kind face, thoughtful eyes, dark hair framing the quiet hope that someone someday might see her whole. Market days were the worst. Miriam stepped into the crowded square, baskets in hand, her stomach twisting in anticipation and dread. She smiled at familiar faces. Some returned it politely, but most looked past her. The men who had once been polite suitors now shook their heads quietly, muttering excuses about distance, work, or family. No one wanted her, not because she was unkind, not because she was foolish, but because she was heavy. Whispers trailed her like a shadow: too large to marry, a pity, really. Children pointed and giggled while their mothers shook their heads in pity or amusement. Every glance felt like a judgment. Every polite decline a tiny wound. Miriam forced herself to keep moving, to count the steps between the stalls, to focus on the mundane tasks of choosing vegetables, checking her brother's list. But the humiliation clung to her. She felt it in the way her chest tightened when a suitor's gaze dropped quickly to the ground, in the way voices hushed as she passed. Thomas's voice cut through her thoughts that evening. "Miriam, we can't keep going like this," he said, leaning against the doorway. His jaw was tight, frustration flashing in his eyes. "We need money. I can't do it alone. And you know how people talk." She flinched, not at his words, they were true, but at the tone that suggested she was the problem. The reality stung. She loved her brother, but she could see the calculations in his eyes. Each coin, each opportunity, each potential match, it all led back to her size, to her body, to what the world would or wouldn't allow her to be. "I'm trying," she whispered. Thomas shook his head, not cruelly, but with a heavy weight of helplessness. "I know, but trying isn't enough when no one will even look at you. People aren't kind, Miriam. You've got to face that." She retreated to her room that night, shutting the door against the judgment of the village, against the echo of her brother's worry. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped tightly, staring at the floor. She was seen by no one. She was wanted by no one. And yet she dreamed, just for a moment, of a life where that wasn't true. Even as the moonlight spilled across her quilt, casting soft shadows, Miriam knew the harsh truth. The world measured her worth by numbers and whispers. And until that changed, she would remain invisible, a gentle soul trapped in a body that society had deemed unworthy. Thomas waited until the evening shadow stretched long across the floorboards. Miriam had just returned from fetching water, her arms still damp from the heavy bucket. "Miriam," he began, voice tight but controlled. "I've been thinking." She frowned, instinctively tense. He rarely spoke like this without urgency. "There's a solution," he said, choosing his words carefully. "A wealthy man owns a ranch far from the village. He's looking for a companion, someone to help manage things." Miriam blinked. "A companion?" Thomas nodded. "Yes, it's practical. He has means. You'd have a roof over your head, food, security. And we could finally ease the burden here." Her stomach twisted. Security. Burden. She felt like a ledger, a commodity to be moved to balance the books. "You mean you want to sell me?" Thomas flinched at the word, but he didn't deny it. "Not like that. You'd have a home, comfort. People see you differently there." Miriam's throat tightened. "Comfort or captivity?" He sighed. "I know it feels like a choice I'm taking from you, but if we wait for someone here, they won't come. You know that. You've seen it yourself." She looked down at her hands, fingers curling. The world had never made room for her. And now her brother, the one person she trusted, was offering her a life measured in practicality, not affection. I don't know," she whispered, voice trembling. "I feel sold, not chosen." Thomas moved closer, placing a hand briefly on her shoulder. "I only want what's best for you. I promise you'll be safe, cared for. That's all I can guarantee." Miriam's mind raced. The village whispers, the polite declines, the stares, everything had led to this. She wanted to scream, to refuse, to run. But part of her, the part that longed for acceptance, for a place where she wasn't just heavy-set, was curious. Could this rancher be different? Could this life be her chance to belong? "I'll think about it," she said finally, voice small. Thomas nodded, relief flickering across his face. "You don't have long. The arrangements must be made soon." Later, in the quiet of her room, Miriam pressed her palm to the wooden wall. A home, security, survival, but at what cost? She felt herself shrinking, reduced to numbers and practicality. And yet, a faint spark of possibility glimmered. Perhaps somewhere out there she could find more than what the village offered, maybe even a measure of respect, of kindness, of freedom. But it felt impossible to separate hope from fear. The next morning, the carriage creaked under the weight of its passengers. Miriam sat stiffly, eyes fixed on the rolling fields that stretched beyond the village. Mist hovered low in the early light, the smell of dew and grass filling the air. Thomas helped her settle, his hands lingering briefly in a gesture of care. "Take care of yourself," he said, voice catching. "And remember, you're stronger than you think." Miriam nodded, swallowing hard. Strength. She wondered if she had any left to give. The village faded behind her, replaced by winding dirt roads and clusters of trees. She tried to breathe in the freedom of open space, but it mingled with fear. What awaited her at the ranch? A man's judgment? Loneliness? Or could it be something else entirely, acceptance, maybe even kindness? The rhythmic clip-clop of the horses offered a strange comfort, a heartbeat that matched her own nervous pulse. She pressed her hands against her knees, feeling the coarse fabric of her skirt. Each mile stretched both hope and dread taut across her chest. She glanced at the countryside, green fields dotted with wildflowers and distant hills. The beauty should have calmed her, yet every curve of the land felt like a question she couldn't answer. Was she leaving behind her shame or carrying it forward into a new place? Hours passed in silence. The carriage rocked gently. Miriam closed her eyes, imagining what the rancher might be like. Would he see her as a burden or as someone worth knowing? She imagined a man with rough hands and a steady gaze, someone who didn't flinch at her size, someone who could make her feel normal. And yet fear whispered in the back of her mind. What if this was a mistake? What if this practical solution turned into a prison? The sun climbed higher and the landscape shifted. Trees thinned, giving way to wide open fields that stretched toward a distant solitary structure, the ranch. Miriam's breath hitched. Ahead lay the unknown, a house, a life, and a man whose reaction she couldn't predict. She felt the weight of her past pressing down, the whispers, the stares, the polite refusals, but also a fragile thread of possibility that maybe, just maybe, this journey could be the start of something different. As the carriage approached the ranch gates, Miriam sat up straighter, tightening her hands around the edges of her skirt. She could not see what awaited, but the first step had been taken, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a small, trembling spark of hope. The carriage creaked to a stop. Miriam stepped down, her fingers tight on the edges of her skirt. A man approached. He was tall, easily over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that seemed to fill the open space around him. His hair was pulled back into a short ponytail, dark and streaked with grey. Sharp jawline, strong hands, a quiet presence that made her heart stumble. "Good morning," he said, voice low but steady. No hesitation, no judgment. Miriam blinked. His eyes, deep brown, thoughtful, didn't flinch at her size. They didn't glance away or linger in pity. They simply looked at her fully, curiously. "I'm Garrett," he said, offering a hand. "Welcome to Redstone Ranch." She hesitated. The world had taught her to expect rejection. She shook his hand cautiously. "I'm Miriam." Garrett's grip was firm, not rough. Encouraging. He stepped back, gesturing toward the house. "Let's get your things inside." Miriam followed. The ranch house was large but welcoming, wood panels, wide windows, a porch that stretched across the front. The air smelled faintly of smoke and hay. Garrett carried one of her smaller bags. He moved with effortless strength, but there was care in the way he handled her belongings. "Thank you," Miriam said softly, unsure if she was speaking to the man or to the quiet respect in his gestures. "Don't mention it," he replied, setting the bag down gently. "You've had a long journey." He led her inside. She noticed his stance, upright, controlled, as if the ranch itself obeyed his presence. Yet, he was approachable, never imposing. He paused at the doorway to her room. "This will be yours," Garrett said. "Simple, clean. You can make it your own." Miriam looked around, surprised. The room wasn't lavish, but it was safe, a place to breathe. I think I will be comfortable," she whispered. "Good," he said. He lingered briefly, then nodded. "I'll leave you to settle in. Dinner will be ready in an hour." Alone, Miriam touched the small quilt on the bed. No one had ever treated her with such quiet care. No one had looked at her as if she belonged, as if she could. When Garrett returned, he carried a tray of food. He set it down with a simple "for you." She ate quietly, stealing glances at him as he worked around the house. He fed the animals, checked fences, and repaired tools. His movements were precise, confident, yet gentle. At one point, he handed her a fresh apple. "Thought you might like one," he said. Miriam's chest lifted. Such a small act, but it mattered. Someone saw her, not her size, not her flaws, just her. By evening, she found herself walking on the porch, watching the sun dip behind rolling hills. She realized something small but significant: she didn't feel judged. The next morning, Miriam rose with the sun. The ranch was alive with sound, the cluck of chickens, the lowing of cows, the distant neigh of horses. Garrett was already outside checking the fence. He noticed her standing on the porch. "Ready to start?" he asked. She nodded. "I think so." The work was steady. She fed the animals, gathered eggs, swept the barn. Each task was simple but necessary. Each completed task brought a quiet sense of achievement. Garrett guided her through routines without patronizing. "Watch the gate," he said. "Animals wander fast if it's left open." She followed his instructions carefully, feeling confidence grow with each step. Mistakes came, of course. She spilled feed once, left a gate open once. Garrett corrected her calmly. "Try again," he said, smiling faintly. "Everyone starts somewhere." She realized she didn't need to be perfect. Acceptance here wasn't conditional. Evenings were quieter. Garrett shared stories, how he came to the ranch, what his father had taught him, the hardships of keeping the land running. Nothing dramatic, nothing grand, just honesty. Miriam listened. Sometimes she laughed quietly. Sometimes she simply absorbed the calm. She began to anticipate these moments, the soft rhythm of companionship. One afternoon, she helped repair a broken fence post. Her hands were sore, her arms tired. Garrett noticed. "You're doing well," he said casually but sincerely. "Better than I expected." She felt warmth rise in her chest. Recognition, not flattery, but acknowledgement. She mattered. She could do something right. Small victories stacked up. She learned the habits of the animals. She learned to predict the patterns of the ranch. She began to feel capable, useful. Garrett offered kindness in small doses, to be waiting on the porch after a long morning, a quiet word of encouragement, a nod when she completed a task properly. Miriam noticed the difference from her old life. No judgment, no whispers, no polite refusals, just simple acknowledgement of effort and care. By the end of the week, she began to feel seen, valued, not for her size, not for her utility alone, but for herself. One night, lying in bed, she reflected on her old life. The whispers, the laughter, the shame, it had all been heavy, all-consuming. And now here, with Garrett treating her with ordinary respect, she realized something profound. The world hadn't changed. But someone had, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough to start changing her, too. It was a morning much like any other. Miriam was gathering eggs when a carriage rumbled along the dirt road. Her heart skipped. She recognized the polished wheels, the crisp uniform of a visitor. And then she saw him, Edwin, a man from the village, once considered a prospect for marriage. Handsome, confident, well-dressed. The kind of man who never hesitated to look at her with judgment before. "Miriam," he called, smiling too easily. "I've been looking for you." She froze, clutching an egg. Memories of whispered refusals and polite declines crowded her mind. I'm here now," she said cautiously, stepping back. Edwin dismounted and approached, his movement smooth, deliberate. "I hear things have changed," he said, glancing around. "You're at a ranch, living differently. But I can help. I can make the world see you thin, elegant, admired. You don't need to hide anymore." Miriam's stomach twisted. Transformation. Approval. The offer shimmered with temptation. She thought of the village whispers, the rejection, the shame she carried like a second skin. "I don't know what you mean," she whispered. Edwin leaned closer. "You could be beautiful, desired. People would notice you. Everyone would. You wouldn't need this isolation." She looked at him, and for a brief moment she felt the old ache, the longing to be wanted, to be chosen. Then her gaze shifted to Garrett, who had appeared behind her, leaning against the fence. His presence was steady, unassuming. His eyes met hers, calm and unwavering. She realized the difference immediately. Garrett had never offered transformation. He offered acceptance, respect, consistent kindness. Day after day. Edwin smiled, confident, unaware of the quiet tension in her chest. "Think about it, Miriam. You don't have to settle for this simple life." Her hands tightened. Simple life. Simple. This life had given her recognition, safety, small victories she had never known. Miriam stepped back, shaking her head. I can't," she said softly. I'm happy here." Edwin's smile faltered. "Happy? Is that enough? The world will never take you seriously this way." Her heart raced. The old fear screamed inside her, society's judgment, her own doubts. And yet, she felt a calm, strong thread connecting her to Garrett. "I don't need their approval," she said firmly. "Not if it means losing myself." Edwin's lips tightened. He gave a small bow and returned to his carriage, leaving a quiet tension in the air. Miriam exhaled, her pulse slowly steadying. She turned to Garrett, who didn't speak, just nodded once. A simple gesture, but it meant everything. She realized the choice wasn't about change or transformation. It was about authenticity, about valuing the life she had earned. That evening, Miriam sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Her mind replayed the day, the offer, the temptation, the weight of what could have been. Thomas appeared quietly, leaning against the doorway. "I heard he came," he said. His voice was careful, concerned. "I did," Miriam said, her hands clenched in her lap. "He offered me everything the village never did. Beauty, status, approval, and—" Thomas asked gently, "And?" "It doesn't matter," she said, voice firm. "Because it wasn't real. He wanted me to be someone else. To change who I am to please others." Thomas studied her. His expression softened. I didn't realize how much you needed someone to just see you as you are." She looked out at the ranch, at the fields, at the animals moving quietly in the evening light, and then at Garrett, who had joined her silently on the porch. He didn't speak, didn't push. He simply existed there, steady, reliable, unjudging. Her chest swelled with understanding. This life was genuine, not flashy, not full of promises. Real care, real respect, earned trust. "I choose this," Miriam said finally, turning to Thomas first. "I choose my life here with him. With me." Thomas's eyes glistened. "I should have seen it sooner," he whispered. "I wanted what was practical, but I didn't think about what made you happy." Garrett smiled faintly, just enough to let her know he understood. No grand gestures, no words of praise, just a presence that said, "You are enough." Miriam felt relief, the heavy weight of shame and fear lifting slightly. She had faced the temptation, faced society's pressures, and chosen authenticity. She realized her worth wasn't defined by others' judgment, but by the life she could build with trust and care. The sun disappeared behind the hills. The ranch fell into a quiet calm. Miriam breathed deeply. She had made her choice, not for approval, not for status, but for herself. And for the first time in her life, she felt truly free. Miriam woke to the soft light spilling through her window. The ranch was quiet, alive with small sounds, the cluck of chickens, the gentle stir of the wind. She stretched, feeling her muscles ache from yesterday's chores, but in a way that felt satisfying. Garrett appeared in the doorway, holding a small basket of fresh bread. He didn't announce himself. He simply stood there, waiting. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning," Miriam replied, smiling. Her chest lighter than it had been in years. Together, they walked toward the animals. She fed the chickens while he checked the fence. He pointed out a loose post. "Here," he said. "It needs tightening." She bent to fix it, and he didn't hover, didn't criticize. He offered guidance only when needed. "Better?" he asked once she stood. "Yes," she said, brushing dirt from her hands. "Much better." There was a silence then, not awkward, but comfortable. No judgments, no expectations, just presence. Later they sat on the porch sharing a quiet meal. Garrett told her about the land, how he had kept it running alone for years. Miriam listened, laughing at small stories, offering her own thoughts and realizing how easy it felt to speak without fear. "You've changed things here," he said casually, breaking a piece of bread. "Not the ranch, you." She glanced at him, startled. "I mean it," he continued. "The way you care for the animals, the land. It's different because of you." Her chest warmed. She had never been told something like that, never by anyone who actually meant it. Days passed in the same rhythm. Mornings of work, Afternoons of small projects, evenings on the porch. They shared meals, laughter, and quiet conversation. One afternoon, she tripped over a tool in the barn. Garrett's hand caught hers instinctively. "Careful," he said. His eyes softened. "You're stronger than you think, but still human." "I thank you," Miriam said. Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear but with something deeper. Recognition, appreciation, connection. She realized that this bond, these moments, was love, not the flashy declarations or fleeting admiration of the village, but real, steady, deep love that grew from trust, shared effort, and small ordinary gestures. Miriam allowed herself to enjoy it fully. She laughed without self-consciousness, shared stories without fear, and learned to value herself the way Garrett did, without conditions, without judgment. By the week's end, she understood something vital. Her worth wasn't measured by others' approval or by changing herself to fit expectations. It was here in this quiet companionship, this steady respect, this genuine connection, and she embraced it fully. Weeks turned into months. Miriam's confidence grew. She moved through the ranch with a quiet pride, handling chores with ease, guiding animals with care, and noticing small improvements in herself she hadn't known were possible. Garrett continued to be steady, his guidance never heavy, his respect constant. Small gestures of kindness remained, a cup of tea left on the porch, a nod when she completed a difficult task, a quiet word of encouragement when she faltered. One afternoon, Thomas arrived unexpectedly. Miriam felt her chest tighten, expecting judgment or concern. Instead, he approached slowly. I wanted to see how you're doing," he said. His voice was softer than before. "And I see now I made a mistake." Miriam watched him, hard, still cautious. "You've grown," Thomas continued. "Not just in strength or skill, but in who you are. I should have listened, understood, trusted you more." She nodded. "I found someone who does," she said, glancing at Garrett nearby. He smiled faintly, quietly proud. Thomas's eyes softened. "I'm glad," he whispered. "Truly." Days went on. Miriam moved through her routines with a sense of purpose and belonging. She no longer feared judgment. Whispers from the village reached her ears sometimes, but they no longer pierced her. She knew her worth and it was independent of anyone else's approval. Evenings were calm. Garrett and Miriam sat on the porch, sometimes talking, sometimes sharing comfortable silence. The bond between them deepened. Laughter came easily. Trust became unspoken. The love she had discovered was quiet, strong, and unshakable. One morning, Miriam noticed a wildflower growing near the fence. Small and resilient, she thought of herself. She had grown, survived, and thrived in a world that had once rejected her. She smiled. Garrett came up behind her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. Thinking about something, he asked. "Just how far I've come," she said. "And how right this feels. For the first time, I feel whole." He squeezed her shoulder gently. "That's because you are and you've always been. I just helped you see it." Miriam's heart lifted. She realized the truth. Happiness wasn't found in approval, transformation, or society's acceptance. It was found in being seen, respected, and loved for who she truly was. The ranch was no longer just a home. It was a place of empowerment, of self-love, of fulfillment. And she knew finally that she belonged, not because anyone else chose her, but because she had chosen herself. Miriam laughed softly, the sound carrying across the fields. Garrett smiled in return. The sun dipped low, casting golden light over the land. For the first time in her life, she felt complete.